He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole wide world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the major plan stealers in his hands. He's got the first time offenders in his hands. He's got the licensed real estate agent in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got a young dermatologist in his hands. He's got the bank loan officers in his hands. He's got the bad motorcycles in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and any mechanical devices of any sort that might be watching or listening tonight. January the 18th, 2018. It's Public Affairs, Public Access. I'm your host, Paul Colby. I've been dropping by this studio, regularly, let's say, over the course of a decade to bring you information that you otherwise would not receive. That is to say, I look at what's going on in the world today, locally, nationally, globally, across the solar system and beyond, but I bring you a slightly different viewpoint than you get anywhere else. And I bring you behind-the-scenes coverage of some important events. I let you know about some events that nobody's told you about. And I thought tonight, since we've just been through a pretty excruciating and hard-to-believe year and have another one roaring right up in front of us, that it would be a good time to summarize some of what happened in 2017 and take a look at what might be coming forward here in 2018. If I review, and I'm going to, the year 2017, a lot of what I say will have to do with the subject of Donald Trump's fake news, what he calls fake news, and the fake news that originates with Mr. President. But there are other things I'll cover. Now, when I talk about Donald and fake news, of course, I've got to talk about his inauguration and the Women's March that followed it, and the discussion of a wall to keep Mexican people out of the country, the discussion of a travel ban to keep other people out of the country, some discussion of what actually happened in the election, some discussion of climate change. You know, the issues go on and on. But there are other issues that are sort of peripheral to the Donald. We'll get to those afterwards because we really need to start where the action is. You know, just the other day, Trump announced his much ballyhooed fake news best hits, if you want to call it that. The Hall of Fame, the Hall of, well, I'm not going to dignify it with the same titles that he did, because what we have is a phenomenon where either the commander-in-chief is a pathological liar or he is delusional in the extreme, living in what some quantum physicists and other theoretical physicists and even some brick-and-mortar physicists call parallel universes, alternate realities. Because for Donald Trump and a small segment of our population shrinking all the time, there is a different world out there than most of us are living in. Let's start back at the beginning of this year when Donald Trump was inaugurated. Well, not many people, I dare say, actually showed up, but in Donald's view of the situation, there were many millions of people there. And it was an event unlike any other, including an event that brought visitors from other planets. Actually, in the wake of that event, the Park Service disagreed with the commander-in-chief, and they said that actually there weren't nearly that many people. Trump got very angry when the Park Service disagreed with his crowd estimates. As a matter of fact, he was so angry that he ripped the so-called Truman carpet from under a coffee table in the blue green room of the White Well, wait, let me just show you something. I mean this carpet. He ripped this out from under the Truman coffee table in the blue-green room. Actually, this is on loan from Bob Mueller, so I have to be really careful with it. Anyway, the president was so disgusted with the National Park Service disagreeing with his estimates that he said they're not in charge of crowd estimates anymore. Immigration and Customs Enforcement would heretofore take over. Or maybe it was the Department of Homeland Security, because the insinuation was that certain people were going to be deported anyway. Another thing that happened right there in the wake of that inaugural festivity, as a matter of fact, while it was going on, was a march of women, millions of women, women that some conservative scribes out there started referring to as pinks. You know, the president, once again, was not pleased. And the first thing he did was he said to all of us, he said to the press corps, and then he said it repeatedly, I don't know these women. I don't know any of these women. And it was a bizarre statement to make, unless you consider that before he was elected president, 19 women had accused him of sexual assault, and Donald apparently thought that there were millions more about to come to Washington to give depositions or something. In any case, he knew that story was not going to fly. He had to back away from that, so he then opined that these women were conflicted, deeply conflicted. I don't know if he meant emotionally or politically, you know, that they actually loved him and somehow had become confused. But that line didn't go over very well either. And what ultimately happened, the president, through his first press conference, prevaricator, I think they have a different title, indicated that, in fact, they had learned from our intelligence agencies that millions of women were going to a Justin Bieber concert somewhere in Virginia and just got lost. They all took the wrong bus and wound up there on the Washington Mall. That's Donald's version of the news. Well, you know, it wasn't very long after he was up and running that he announced that because of Mexican rapists and drug dealers and all sorts of other people, that he was going to have to build a wall. He had already said this when he was campaigning to be president, but now he started to get specific. And so one of the first questions that arose, if you want to use the polite word, was who is going to pay for this? Because obviously Mexico wasn't going to pay for it. So the first candidate for paying for the border wall turned out to be driverless cars, if you can believe that. It's pretty hard for me to believe, but at one point, you know, Donald was even saying that it was a done deal. Of course, there was no such deal, but he kept wanting to tie Mexico to this, so he promoted some stories. In particular, I remember the one in the Charlotte White Person Whisperer, which suggested not now that Mexico would pay, but that a Mexican person, never otherwise identified, would be poor. Well, you know, this article said a lot more than that, because it's the first time that that anyone had revealed discussions with potted plants. And not that the president didn't have other advisors, but apparently potted plants were suggesting a lot of policies to the president that he tried to explain to the rest of us. But you know what? That story just wouldn't go down either, and so we had to have somebody else paying for the wall, because the wall, as you know, the wall never went away. The people in Hollywood started to take more of a central focus when Hollywood was beset with scandals, and eventually the president decided that overrated actress Meryl Streep had volunteered to pay for the wall. Of course, she denied that, but who would not? I have to tell you, it's a story that just hasn't gone away all year. I was just giving you some of the high points, but there were a couple of other latter developments. You'll recall the discussions of the Visa lottery. At one point, the president was saying that the White House itself would be conducting a brand new lottery, and winners of this lottery would receive a Visa. I imagine they're talking about a guest card. Visa, you know, well, I was told it was going to be $10 million Visa cards. That idea just flat didn't go anywhere. And the last one that had any traction was the discussion of building a moat all the way from El Paso to San Diego, all right, and filling this moat in with a golf course. Probably this would be huge. This would be the biggest golf course anybody's ever seen. Be, you know, like a par 3,200, because there would be so many holes, you know, from El Paso to San Diego. Well, there's just 4,000 it's a 4,000 hole golf course is just not something that a lot of people can get behind, you know. They just couldn't. Anyway, the wall is still with us, but we'll get to 2018 later. It wasn't just Mexican rapists that the president was worried about. Anybody who is not white eventually got to be a problem. And so next was the well, non-white or non-Christian, let's put it that way. So the travel ban was the next chapter in the Donald delusional, I'm running out of adjectives for this. Anyway, you'll remember that there were stories in the Rust Belt blabber where Trump complained about a broken justice system, and that a broken justice system means somebody who had a judicial position had a disagreement with Donald Trump's analysis of what his constitutional prerogatives were. It harkens back to the discussion of Judge Curiel, also incidentally from San Diego, the site of the putative giant golf course. Anyway, you'll remember that he, being Donald Trump, didn't think that Judge Curiel was the person who should make a decision way back when about his Trump University and its fraudulent behaviors. And I think the implication here, you all heard it just like I did, was that Judge Curiel is one of those people who might be getting deported. Later in 2017, when the travel ban came up and there were, God forbid, judges from Hawaiian descent and things like that, you heard the scuttlebutt from the Trump camp that some of these people just liked tamales too much, giving you the same insinuation that certain people have to leave. And actually, when I get to talking about taxes this year, the Republican tax scam, there was even a provision that people who voluntarily would deport themselves would get a tax break. But we'll get back to that didn't go anywhere, but we'll get back to taxes later. No, I'll tell you something. When the president was watching all of those women at the Women's March, there was a sign that he saw, and I believe he misinterpreted it, but you may remember this. Matter of fact, I even have that sign. It was donated to me. And the sign read, "You have no mandate." And of course, Donald Trump, being the type that he is, thought his sexuality was being attacked. But then as he thought about it, he realized that maybe there just weren't room enough on the sign to put mandate in the same line. Maybe they meant mandate, and then he got to thinking, well, I have another quarrel with the mainstream press here, and that is that they say I didn't actually win this election, that there was something wrong. I I didn't actually win the well, you saw it in the Georgia News Bunny there, the discussion of massive voter fraud. Huh? You remember that? Don't we have a picture of that one? Oh, I suppose we don't. Well, yes, we do. There was an insinuation by the president that there were certain people who had voted in more than one state. One man, for example, allegedly voting in 12 states. And because of what he called a bogus popular victory, he was going to set the record straight and prove that Hillary actually lost the popular vote. Now, we all know that by the end of the year, this was going nowhere. You saw the story, I think, in the New Jersey Noisemaker when Trump actually disbanded his imaginary voter fraud investigation. It turns out that many states would not comply with his request for naked pictures of voters. And I think I can explain that better as we move along here and cover more of these issues, but it certainly was an embarrassment. But even after the president gave up on the idea that there was election fraud, he didn't give up on the idea that Hillary was crooked. You know that as well as I do. And some of the stories that came out, many of you have heard the discussion of some sort of uranium deal involving Hillary Clinton, and I don't think people understood exactly what was being charged, because according to the Trump camp, she was selling American radioactive salmon to Putin and other supporters in Europe. This was even covered in some news channels that were set up for dogs. I know some dogs spend as much time on the internet these days as their humans do. But actually, once again, it didn't really seem to go anywhere. And as a matter of fact, Trump supporters, at the end of the day, Trump supporters were confused. And I remember some of them, if I have another sign here, some of them at their rallies were saying, look her up. Well, anyway, that also continues to the present day. And it's just the kind of climate we live in. And speaking of climate change was another Donald Trump imaginary issue. He wanted to pull out of the Paris Accords, as you well know. And early on, he told some Swedish novelists that the temperature hadn't changed in his room or any of his rooms in years. And that proved something. Now, we know, I believe we know that, that Donald always looks for authorities when he takes a position, and I think he draws most of his inspiration for this scientific hoax discussion from a book called The Glacier Menace, and it's on sale at your local locker-up hardware stores and Book of the Mouth Club, but I haven't been able to get through it. It's a really hot book. I mean, when you pick it up, I mean, you need gloves, honestly. But what's inside it, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not able to read it. It's written in a language that no one has ever shown me before. As the year went by, there were big issues around Trump and his connection, or as he said, his lack of a connection with a bunch of authorities in, well, Soviet Russia, or now Putin's Russia, who in some way assisted him in getting elected. And of course, this was a raw nerve for Donald, and ultimately he decided to fire James Comey. And the reason that he gave for firing James Comey, first of all, he said that James had asked to be fired because he was going to go on tour with Lady Gaga. and he was going to play the conga drum. Now, you know what? I talked to Lady Gaga about that this week. Actually, James Comey never said that. He said, the only thing I can play is a cigarette lighter, so if you never use a cigarette lighter in the band, I won't be able to help. Well, anyway, Donald changed that tune. I mean, as you know, his attention span is about as long as, well, somebody in a recent book, well, let me get to that later. Anyway, he changed his mind, and he said then that, he wanted us to change our minds. And he said that he fired James Comey because he was a messy eater. And if there's one thing that the FBI doesn't need now or ever, it's messy eaters that are in charge of, in charge of the entire whatever. Anyway, that being said, when James Comey was fired, nobody stopped talking about Russian collusion. In fact, Trump and Russia collusion became a daily bad news story for Donald Trump, and he suggested many, many times that there was absolutely no evidence of collusion. Now, when he did this, he was actually relying, as some reporters discovered, on a very, very strange and aberrant decision in one of the appeals courts in a case called Hobler versus Flumy. And it's a case that really doesn't speak to the issues involved, because in this case, a guy who was going to rob a gas station told his girlfriend, and she said, if you're serious, I'll get you a gas mask, and that way you won't have a problem with gas fumes. And then that is interpreted in this decision as evidence that she colluded with this potential robber who was going to rob a gas station. And of course, the question for Donald Trump, this meant that collusion is about buying a gas mask when somebody is going to rob a gas station. So that's part of his basis for believing this, assuming that he has any basis at all. But once again, he likes to rely on authorities, and one of those authorities here is Professor Michael Fibriolato, I think it is, with Betty Varmiona. In this one, they're talking about collusion as it relates to country music here in our century, and they're suggesting that there can be no collusion when a dressmaker and an idiot with a magic marker are just having fun bullying liberals. So that's why Donald has said repeatedly, those are some of the reasons why Donald has said repeatedly that there's no collusion. But if collusion with the Russians wasn't a problem, then standing up for statues of Confederate generals, that became a real problem. And it happened back in the summer when a statue of the Confederate General Sherman Cogg was found floating in the Big Whammy River. Now, Sherman Cogg, you see, was actually beloved by a lot of people, and Trump said beloved by a lot of people, not only in the South, but everywhere. And let me tell you something about Sherman Cogg, because he's an interesting figure. He is a man who invented the grit. We now call them grits, but when he came up with the idea, he started with one grit. They became very popular, and so a huge number of people in the country have a fondness for him. He was also a respected musician, and he influenced a whole lot of our current rock musicians, I think. Now, of course, there was another general, and he was celebrated in an issue this summer of popular mechanics and electricians, and his name, Mr. Seymour, is the guy we call a Confederate general now, but he thought of himself in somewhat different terms. He was a Confederate general, and as a practical matter, getting rid of his statue was something that was going to be possible because a used car lot was going to take the statue and put it in their lobby, but they eventually backed out due to the political pressures, and so the statue wound up at a church, the Church of Salsa, I believe it was, in Flushing Meadows. But you know, let me just tell you something honestly about General Seymour, because he was also beloved. As a matter of fact, he is the man who first invented casinos. He divorced his Haitian wife in the middle of the Civil War, and then he opened one of the very first casinos. This is what inspired Donald Trump. That's why he likes him so much. And this casino used the very first Bitcoins. As we now know, Bitcoins are making a big comeback, but these original Bitcoins came with a handle, as you can see. So you could install these in General Seymour's slot machines in his casinos. You know, it went in a slit, or it was some kind of a hole, some slit hole, and it was. And so anyway, these early Bitcoins were used in all of the country. He had casinos in many countries, and they all had these slit holes. The slit hole countries. But anyway, so much for the Confederate generals. If it wasn't one war, it's the next war. And so the biggest next delusion for Donald Trump involved the national defense and the fact that we have a depleted military. Depleted military. You know, notwithstanding the fact that we have the largest defense budget in the history of Earth, especially if you consider that it includes black operations and illegal black operations, illegal domestic surveillance, tons of secret money, a secret space program, et cetera, there has not been such a defense budget in the history of the universe. So one wonders, what could Donald be doing to add to our defense budget? Well, the first thing apparently is to make life easier for officers in the military. And what he's going to do is provide special quarters for all officers in the military. These will include swimming pools and presentation areas, big parking lots, golf courses. All of the officers who don't currently have underground bunkers are supposed to receive underground bunkers. And I mean, it's going to be a status symbol. If you are an officer and you don't have a bunker, all you have to do is talk to Donald, because he's ready to come across with and also to improve the lives of our military men who are just, you know, enlistees, the people on the ground. The first thing we're going to do is get them much better shoes. And I mean much better shoes. Some of these shoes that Donald wants them to have, they sell for anywhere between, almost $3,000. And I know that there are some versions, some cheaper versions. That's because we have bidding in the military. We have some cheap $700 versions. So, and military personnel are entitled, I am told, and this is Sarah Huckabee Sandbox said this recently, all of our enlisted personnel are entitled to a squash allotment. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the squash allotment is for, but that's another $700 some dollars for all of the enlisted personnel and of course you expect there to be some weapon systems. Well, there sure are some weapon systems. And the one that I find very novel is the multi-spray handheld mid-range GX-14. And as best I can tell, what this is for, you see every day, and we've talked about this before, you see chemtrails being sprayed all over Houston, all over Texas, all over America, all over the world. Well, now, whoever's doing that is going to get help from our enlisted personnel because they can spray them on the ground with the GX-14. So that's how you spend a lot more money on defense. At least that's what I've been able to tell so far from my research. If you're going to spend that much on defense, then you're going to spend less on something else. And one of the things you're going to spend less on is national parks. As you might know, Donald Trump announced that the Bear Ass Monument is going to get, actually, I think that it's really called the Bear's Ears Monument, but we can check into that. He's going to turn most of it into a parking lot, he says, or a parking lot, or maybe they'll drill, or maybe they'll mine, or maybe they'll log it. Now, you know, that's just bad news in my book, but the president says that when this happens, of course, he's not really destroying the national park system or the national monuments because he's going to create a couple of new ones. And these, in my mind, look pretty minor league. The first one that's off of Interstate 75, if I'm not mistaken, it looks like that it's somehow dragging up these Confederate generals again because it's on the site of the Battle of Vodkaphobia. According to the history I know, that is something where there were only 4 porta-cans during the Civil War and a bunch of things got out of hand. There's another one. This one involves General Farr, and it's in the national park in Vanilla Bark, South Carolina. This guy, I don't know much about him, but I can tell you that the national park there is about 2 acres. So even though he's replacing some of our national parks, he's replacing them with virtually nothing. But let's just go right on to the next thing that delusional Donald had in mind. That was moving the capital of Israel. And the first place he wanted to move it, as you may recall, was Van Nuys, California, something that was never properly explained to me. But that wasn't going down well with the scandal in Hollywood. So the next thing he said was, well, we're going to move it to, not only move it, but our capital, both of our capitals, to Crab Poo County. I don't know much about Crab Poo County except that everybody there has an email account on Netanyahu.com. Yeah, and then that changed again, and the last I heard they were going to move the capital of Israel to the Moon Colony in East Texas. And frankly, I've been looking for that on a Google map, and I just can't find it. I really can't find it. While we're on the subject of these capitals, did you hear about the moving the embassy in London? Well, the embassy in London is being moved, and there's a backstory about that. But what's interesting to me is that the entrance to our new embassy in London will be on the 37th floor, as you can see in our exhibit here. And that's because there are all of those Muslims in London, and you know how Donald feels about them. Whenever we have these discussions, it comes down to a question, why does Donald pursue these strange things? Because of his base. Because of his base. Well, me and my staff, we went looking for the base because we had some inside information we wanted to confirm. And we started out down I-10, I can tell you, going towards Florida. And then as you get closer, I can't tell you exactly where this is, but you can see the entrance to the base, heavily guarded thing. We even had a map that was given to us by an insider, and this indicated a couple of things that were curious to me. First of all, there's a shoe factory there. God knows why Donald would have a shoe factory unless he's like making shoes for everybody in the military or something. And then over next to the planned detention area, I don't know what they'd use that for, was a squash farm, and we were going to go in next to the squash farm so we could get to Putin's condo, which is supposed to be there on the base, heavily guarded. Well, we got to the squash farm, and wouldn't you know it, stranger things I just don't know, but we found hair growing. It was a hair-raising experience. Oh, anyway, now we know where some of Donald's hair comes from. Apparently it's renewed on a regular basis, but anyway, when we got past the squash farm, we could not find what we were looking for. There was recently a so-called NSA leak showing that Hillary Clinton was being held in Putin's submarine right there on the corner of the base. I can tell you that based on our research, that place has been moved, or that condo at least has been moved somewhere, and this just counts as fake news. Fake news. We're back to where I started, fake news. But you know, as I thought about this subject, and I thought about it a lot, I said, fake news. And then somebody in the intelligence community told me something I'd never heard about. There are apparently two Donalds, or let's say Donald is a split personality, and we are mostly seeing these days the evil twin. The other good angel, Donald, apparently has been trying to tell us for a long time that what Trump is saying is phony, is something completely different. In fact, I would say he is talking about fake news. It's a Scottish term, if you want to look it up. Fake news. In fact, I have just discovered that there is a website, Fake News Live, that presents a picture quite different than the one that the big Donald has been spouting live on Twitter and in press conferences and everywhere. For example, it says dozens attended the inaugural festivities. It points out that the Washington swamp in D.C. being drained so that new bottom feeders can arrive, etc., etc. There's even a fake news storyboard on the internet for four-legged creatures right now. And as far as I can tell, the fake news roundups actually tell the truth about the story. Look at this, for example. Casting doubt on whether football stars are going to finance the border wall. That was one of Trump's claims. And here it's just revealed that, well, what's revealed is that it's phony. And the fake news channels apparently correct their mistakes, unlike some people we know. You know, they correct their mistakes. So all I can tell you is there's a different take than Donald's, but I think we've pretty much covered most of his delusions. That's not all of the stories from 2017. However, there are other things that are peripheral to Donald. For example, issue 1, North Korea. That was in the news all the time, what North Korea was doing. They were shooting these missiles up for a long time that seemed to go nowhere, and we now know why. Apparently, they'd been stealing plans for driverless cars, and you know how driverless cars were having a lot of problem getting where they were supposed to go for a long time. So apparently that was the technology that was first being used. But over time here in 2017, our little friend over there could announce that he had a finger on the nuclear button. And of course, Donald Trump said he had a finger on a nuclear button. You know, it got really hairy. It got so hairy that there was even an emergency alert about a ballistic missile threat to Hawaii. And you probably saw that, but you may not have seen the real alert cancellation. I've got it right here for you to look at. It says that someone accidentally hit the nuclear button while tweeting, probably in the middle of the night, and that, well, you know the rest. So all I can tell you is North Korea was a mess all year. Sex scandals were a mess all this year, and it got to the point where almost everybody of the male persuasion, almost everybody has been named so far. In fact, there's a website, if you want to keep up and know who hasn't been named, you can go to Not Guilty So Far. I check it periodically just to make sure that none of my friends are on there anymore. And you know, it's getting so bad that there are even books coming out. So many American males really don't know what to say to women anymore today. This book here by Dr. Ira Fumetub talks about some of the things, you know. He says whether or not you should say, like, would you like to meet my psychiatrist? Or can I get your recipe for soy sauce? Or do you have a place to stay during the hurricane? Anyway, American males, they just have so much that they need to learn about dealing with women. So then you have this. Let's just move on here. Well, I got to tell you that the next big issue involves sporting figures, and there was a misinterpretation here also, because what really happened was not so much people taking a knee as people taking off the third quarter in the NFL, and I can't say that I blame them, because it's, you know, it's hard work, but some of these people seem to not like the Star-Spangled Banner that we sing, and so now the Players Union is trying to work up some new words to the lyrics. So that's going to be a continuing messy story. Probably go to some other sports. The solar eclipse was big news this year. Apparently, it's strange because a lot of people were bored by it, but that is understandable, since apparently a lot of people just watched it on their cell phones. They don't actually know where the sun is. And of course, Donald Trump had to interject himself into this. He said, if climate change is real, then why did the sun eclipse, using it as a verb, just like Nostradamus predicted? Well, I suppose that's a question. I don't know if it's a good question. Anyway, you know, in connection with this eclipse, North Korea and ISIS both took credit for it. And as I understand, this hasn't been a well-known story, but apparently billions of bitcoins were stolen while things were in the dark. JFK files, new JFK files were released this year. And you know what? Some of them in the mainstream press, I got to give Donald some credit on this. The mainstream press can be ridiculous sometimes. They pointed out, take for example this Washington Post story, they pointed out that the files show the CIA did some really bad stuff. Huh. And, well, of course, as again, I have said this before, Donald injected himself here, asking some CIA persons if they could prove that President Obama was born in Kenya or Nairobi or Nigeria. Apparently, they couldn't, but the oddest thing about all of this is that Trump had to announce to the public after the release of the JFK files that apparently he's cleared. He's cleared. Well, I didn't know he was guilty of anything. The Republicans, let me briefly cover the Republicans. They wanted to have a big legislative victory this year by repealing and replacing Obamacare. They couldn't actually get that act together, so they changed it to retreat and renew, or retreat and rename, and so they just renamed some parts of it. For example, the Affordable Care Act, which went nowhere because it didn't actually offer anybody any medical coverage. They did, however, have a victory, so to speak, if you listen to them, passing a tax bill which we would call a tax scam. This obviously looks like it's meant for people with plenty of money who don't need any benefit from a tax scam. Just look at this website. Look at that website. Me, I know I'm going to be staying at the Trump Tel Aviv as many times as I can. And there are books telling you how to, chokes me up, how to make money with the new tax bill, and I think good luck on that score. But apparently there are some middle income people who will actually benefit. In fact, there's 28 of them, I think, according to a new article in Crypto Currently. 28 people in the middle class are actually going to benefit from the tax scam, and that's good news. Last set of news for this year. It involves the Apple Watch, and there was first a discussion of whether Apple was making batteries for its iPhones go bad when there was time to release a new iPhone. Turned out they had an example of, they had an explanation for this. There were also reports of similar battery problems with old trucks, but that went nowhere. However, the real story turned out to be that the Apple Watch might be taking pictures when you're not paying attention to the Apple Watch taking pictures, okay? And this resulted in a blockbuster story in the Wall Street Journal later in the year, or was it the Wall Street Journal, I guess, talking about credit agencies being hacked and the discovery that there were nude photos added to millions of consumers' files. I suppose because the Apple Watch. And this resulted in a story that really was a blockbuster in Newsweek this year. Raymond Ramon, the French reporter, he said in an article, "Is Trump really talking about fake nudes?" He said what many of us now understand. And I'm back to fake news again. Was he saying fake news? Was he saying fake news? Or was he saying fake nudes? Because apparently, what we now understand is that when reporters had stories critical of Donald Trump, and Donald confronted them during a press conference or otherwise, or a tweet, he simply said, fake nudes. In other words, threatening the reporters with these potential fake news pictures, fake nude pictures. Oh, I think you can see how this goes. All right? And that's how stories get choked off. And that's what 2018 was like, but 2017 was like, but now we're in 2018, and what can I tell you? It has to be better, right? Because this is the year of the doggo. It used to be dog, but now it's changed to doggo to go with the popular culture. One thing I can say about 2018, things were looking pretty bad for the Donald, well, most of 2017, and they're not getting any better because there's a new book, and I think you've seen this book on TV, in the bookstores, and probably even on web pages. Fried and Furry, Dinner at the Trump White House. Now, Wolf Michaels is definitely on to something here. He has a lot of inside sources who said some things about President Trump that a lot of us have been thinking for a long time. And as far as I can tell, he's right on the money with most of these things. First, there was the testimony, or if you want to call it that, the disclosure from White House auto mechanic Steve Bunyan. Steve said he, Donald Trump, is like a fried egg on a Ferris wheel. He thinks God is like a giant octopus who can't swim. And he always wants to know if it's tango time. Well, so do I, but for different reasons, you know, because I do like to dance. But that wasn't the worst of it. There's a White House gardener who now can have a career on TV if he likes, Maynard Fwip, who revealed that Trump, quote, had the attention span of a ham sandwich, and I was constantly asked to find Brazil on a map. I'm not sure why, but I am told, this is another backstory, apparently there are a bunch of radioactive salmon that are missing from the Trump base, and it's possible that they're in Brazil. But that's a story for another episode of Public Affairs. Yeah, it is. And I think one of the more interesting of the disclosures in the book is from the Russian journalist Asvanovich Sputnitsky, because he points out that he'd never heard Trump speak or rarely heard Trump speak in complete sentences, and then one day it was explained to him that English was really a second language, or maybe a third language for Trump, and that begins to make things a lot clearer in my mind. A second language. Anyway, that's the beginning of Trump's problems, but we know that his problems, and by the way, this story just keeps on coming, because today we have heard that Steve Bannon is going to be testifying before Mueller's commission. So let me talk about what and actually all that he has said so far that we know of from press reports. He knows the nicknames of some of the people who were in famous meetings, and we'll get to the Steele diary in a minute. He knows the names of some people in meetings by nickname. That is to say, Shorty and Left Hook and Misconduct and Louie are some of the names of the people. Now, don't get ahead of yourself here. Let me back up. The first thing we know of already from press reports is that Trump wears women's shoes in private. I mean, when he's hanging around the house, that's all that he wears. Now, the fact is that Mueller has the real Steele dossier. If you're like me, you downloaded it when it was first on the web, all 30 pages, but that's all we saw is 30 pages. He's seen it all, so that includes, for example, some pictures that are really, I mean, as far as I can tell, these pictures are things Donald never wanted anybody to see. And there are these documents. Now, this document here is from the Mars Escargot. That's out in Florida. That's like the Trump White House on vacation. And you see all of these payments here that appear to be payments for some sort of repairs around the property. But according to the information that I have, these payments are actually to individual subcontractors. These are people who are in the entertainment and services industry. Okay, one of them for $130,000 has already been discussed in the press by other names. And this document here, this that you see on your screen now, reportedly is the first tweet from Donald Trump. It goes back a long way, and it's hard to figure this out, but as it says here, this is a test. My human is sedated. We have the money, but it's all bitcoins, and I assume that will be okay. That is one of the strangest things I've heard so far, and I've heard a lot of strange things. Now, if you're Donald Trump, and he is, the main thing that you want to do when news of this sort starts to pack up on the runway is distract. And that's what he has done. That's what he has planned for February, because January is not looking very good. He's going to release a new CD the Jeff Sessions. This features Sarah Sanders on megaphone, and it'll be available from Amazon's Black Hole Foods Market, which is pretty exciting. I might even want to buy one myself. You know, tech news is coming forward too in 2018. Tech giants are planning to show that they're good guys because there was so much bad press about tech giants this year. For example, Facebook. Facebook is planning to change the navigation on your Facebook page so that you can get out of your echo chamber if you want to, all right? Now, some people, of course, will still hang around for the best of Pizzagate or for Obama bashing, but according to this plan change, they will have an option if they want it. And Twitter, you have heard that Twitter is actually expanding the number of characters you can use in a tweet, which would seem to work well for a blabbermouth like, say, our president. But what they're actually doing behind the scenes is creating a list of words that you can use on a tweet and words that you can't. And that's going to change things considerably. Other tech giants, well, they're doing similar things, and I think the most notable is that on YouTube, they're not going to show pictures anymore of self-immolation or of kids swallowing Tide tabs, although it's all right for them to videos of them driving sports cars. Well, I don't understand that. On Snapchat, now you're going to have snaps that will disappear instantly before they're even sent, or that will stay around in perpetuity, and that's an interesting thought. And it's been said in some blogs here now that at the latest Consumer Electronics Store show, that almost all of the visitors were not humans but robots. That is very fascinating. And if you think that robots and robotics is still way off in the future and artificial intelligence is just, you know, minimalist, then I'd like to hear you, I'd like for you to hear some testimony from somebody I've got on the phone now on Skype. We've got him right now. Let him go ahead.
Hi there, folks. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you tonight. I'm in D.C. here working on this government shutdown issue. I have my hands full because some of these congressmen are trying to find a way to fund it and keep it open. So anyway, my shape-shifting robotic clone volunteered to do the show for me tonight, and I said, well, what the hell, give him a shot. And he seems to be doing just fine, so I'm going to hand it back over to him, and I'll catch up with you guys next time.
What can I say? I'll catch up with you guys one of these times in the future, too. That's all I have to say, and sorry for the coughing spasm. That was built in as a test, and it seems to have worked pretty well, too. So, good night for now, and have a fabulous future.